I'm Lisa Fishman. I'm the director of the Davis Museum. Thank you all for being here. It's fantastic to see such a great turnout. Let me say, when Tony and I started talking, I don't know, 2 years ago about an exhibition here, I told him that his time at Wellesley would be special. I must say, this has been special. I like to deliver. So you've all created an extraordinary circumstance here. I haven't heard people talk more about art in such focused ways in my whole life. I think this beats graduate school. This has been intense. Everyone is involved, everyone is talking, everyone has an opinion, everyone's thinking hard. It's fantastic. So, it is an enormous pleasure to have Tony Matelli here, to debut New Gravity, to engage our community with his work. I hope everyone has had a chance to walk through the galleries to see the exhibition, because the figure outside has taken most of the attention over the past few days. It's great to see it in the context of the rest of his work and of the exhibition that we've staged here. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Tony Matelli.
I know everything's gotten really hot lately over this, and I made my lecture, I didn't create a special lecture for you, sorry, because there was no possible way to imagine these circumstances. So what I have here is just a normal lecture that I normally give. I'm going to try and be as fast as I can with it, and I'm going to skip over a bunch of stuff, so that if you guys want to ask questions, you two in the cheap seats up there, if you want to ask a bunch of questions, we can get to all that stuff at the end. So just keep in mind I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff, and I'm going to be fast. If you have questions, just shout them out when we go, and let's make this quick. Quick and cool. All right, so this is a work I made when I was in graduate school. And when I was there, I was invested in a certain type of artwork that was designed to think. That was more or less designed to project my intellect. I was pretty invested in that. And a woman at school came up to me and she said, "Tony, you know, your work is so dull. And you're such an interesting guy. How can you parse that? How come these things aren't in line in some way? I think that what you should do is make your work as exciting as it is to hang out with you." Which, of course, I was flattered by, and it got me thinking about the type of art I wanted to make and how I regarded myself as an artist. And from that moment on, I decided to become almost a romantic type of artist, or at least in that tradition, in a sense. Become an artist who was invested in my emotions, my hopes, my fears, my dreams. And so I would make work that would address that stuff right away and directly. So this is the next piece I made, the next piece after that conversation that I made. It's a sculpture of a cardboard box. It says my name on it, and I stored studio crap in it over some time, and it's called "My Soul Searching Has Finally Paid Off." The sculpture of an open box, and to me this was a kind of declaration. It was a way of saying to the world that that I'm open. I have nothing inside. I'm ready to accept things. I'm ready to take things in. So it was both kind of an acquiescence and a declaration at the same time. I consider this my first self-portrait, of which I've made many since. This is a work called Squalor, and it's a bronze cast of apple core. I was very interested at the time in how shitty a piece of work could be, a piece of artwork could be, how minimal, how little it could be, how diminutive it could be, but still contain big ideas. And also I was interested in this idea of mistaking a work of art for something else. I thought that there was lots of power in that. I remember seeing Dwayne Hansen when I was a kid, and there was a sculpture of a janitor in a museum. And I was looking at all these, like, there's a terrible Alex Katz here, and some other things, and I was looking at those other things, and I saw that Dwayne Hansen, and I was startled by it at first. And then I got to look at it and think about it, and what that work did to me was, it embodied the idea so directly of what it was, a janitor, which is supposed to be unseen in museums. The labor behind a museum is supposed to be invisible. So this made something invisible visible very palpably and very directly. It made all the other things in the room feel like stage props. It made them feel somehow artificial to me, or just like propositions. But this other thing had real visceral power. And as a kid of, I don't know, maybe I was 9 when I first went to that place. That stuck with me. So a lot of this work that you'll see is in that spirit, especially the sculpture outside. This is called Prank. And along that vein, this is called Bag of Shit on Fire. And this is a sculpture, obviously, you know the prank. But I was really interested in that idea of pranks being kind of acceptable social antagonism, you know, and it really, to me, represented kind of some real fissures in our social fabric that I thought was interesting. Also, I like the idea that it's something fragile that you immediately get the impulse to step on this thing, but which would be disastrous, obviously. This is my first show I did in New York. I'm going really fast again, so there's a reason for that. These works are called Fuck the Rich. And in the back here is called, this is called Fuck the Rich Deluxe. And then to the left, which has some importance for today, is a sculpture called Lost and Sick, which depicts 3 Boy Scouts who are vomiting on this little piece of Adolescence has some interest to me, you know, that moment when you're just becoming independent, in a sense. And Boy Scouts is all about that, right? It has all kinds of trials that you go through to become a man, let's say. And I like the idea of these 3 boys, right at that moment where they're being tested into manhood, into masculinity, them failing at that. Also, there's those kinds of like indoctrination with the Boy Scouts. You know, it's political, it's moral, it has lots of politics around it, and there's lots of stuff around that. You know, and I like the idea of saying no to all of that. You know, so vomiting is the ultimate form of rejection in a way. It's a physical rejection, but it's also I don't know, a metaphysical rejection in a sense, so the metaphorical rejection. And there's that again. Fuck the Rich Deluxe. This was a gallery show, and none of these sold for some reason. I thought it was a way for the collectors to absolve themselves of their rich guilt, but my dealer at the time said, "Tony, they don't feel guilt." This is the next thing I did after that show, and after I was finished with that show, I was in the process of now fulfilling the editions that had sold from that show. So what I felt in my personal life is that I was just I didn't have any new ideas that were coming to me, you know, like nothing was occurring to me. I felt kind of dumb. And I was involved in the production of this work that I had already made. So I felt a little bit zombified, you know, I felt a little bit like I was in a trap. And so I wanted to make a sculpture that addressed that addressed just going through rote motions, you know, being in this trance, just doing the stuff. So I came up with a sculpture called Sleepwalker. Originally, I thought that he would be like a Neanderthal or something. I imagined him in that way because I wanted to speak to this something inside of all of us that is comfortable in this position of just going through the motions, just being asleep at the wheel, which I thought was innate in us, you know. And so I wanted to somehow speak to that. So I tried to make a Neanderthal thing. It didn't look right. So I eventually came up with this, and this speaks to that interest in kind of late adolescence, early adulthood. This is a person who is a sculpture of a young man, maybe 25 or 22 or something like this. So to me, it was important that he be that age, you know, because that's the age when you need to be making vital decisions. And this is a person who is not making any, who is lost, who is isolated, profoundly isolated. So that's the initial Sleepwalker. This is the first one. And he was designed to be inside. it has a strange effect in a museum because it then reflects upon all the other artwork on the wall in a sense, you know. So I was commissioned by the Public Art Fund to do an outdoor sculpture. And so much of outdoor sculpture is super macho, hyper corporate. In a modern language, it's a big red thing or a big blue thing or a shiny thing. And they function as kind of corporate hood ornamentation in a sense. So I never liked that work, and I don't know anyone really who does. But they exist everywhere, and so that's your initial idea of an outdoor work of art. So I wanted to make something that felt vulnerable, and felt fragile, and felt mobile too. Something that you could see maybe in multiple places. So I proposed to New York that I would do this sculpture of a seeing eye dog, or I'm sorry, a lost dog, a stray dog. That would be in 3 locations. There would be one downtown, one uptown, one in Brooklyn. So that if you're in the bus and you see one, maybe 1 month, and you see another month, then you know that this dog is really hopeless. You know, it's super lost. And there's no more responsible dog than a seeing eye dog. And the seeing eye dog also implicates its blind master. So with this sculpture, you have a seeing eye dog who is lost, and also it implicates by not even representing its blind owner. So I didn't have the budget to do it in 3 locations, so we only did it in 1 location in Brooklyn. But in Belgium, I did have the budget to do that. So here's one, and the other, third, and the kids. So many kids just riding this thing like an amusement park. They asked me to do another public art piece, and I decided to just do a sound thing. I did a fictional party, a fake party, and all you would hear is the sound like it's coming in the city. You know, you would hear it coming through a window. And as you're walking down the street, you would hear that sound, and you would try to find the party. It doesn't ever exist. So it's a phantom party. And it's kind of like a utopian space. It's an idea. Parties, good parties, are special things. And you can't plan for them so well. They just happen. The same way like a riot happens. It just happens. And you can't orchestrate it. So I saw this as a kind of the temporary autonomous zone of total pleasure that you can never really get to. I decided to get rid of the idea of using the kind of Neanderthal sleepwalker and went just with a chin, which I think works pretty well. And so this is the first project I did with Lisa Fishman, which was in Buffalo, New York. And she invited me to come to a project in a beautiful space, really, really tall, gorgeous space with a small footprint of maybe 25 feet square, and a very low budget in a short amount of time. And I thought to myself, there's no way that I could possibly compete with this gallery. It's just too beautiful, it's too tall. Anything you put in is going to be dwarfed by the space. So I decided to not even try and compete with the space and just kind of lowball it. So these are all sculptures of weeds. And again, this is sort of in that spirit I was talking about before, the spirit of representation, where initially you see the thing for what the thing is, you know? Before you understand it as sculpture. You see it as an object, you see it as a weed. You don't see it as an object, you see it as an actual weed. Initially, it doesn't last long, and then you understand it as sculpture, but that's a very complicated moment where you understand something as one thing, and then a few seconds later you understand it as something else. And I think that that's a very complicated and interesting art experience. The similar art experience that is happening outside with that figure. So that has a lot to do with a lot of this earlier work I was making. So here's a good example of that. So these were made out of various plastics at the time, and later I switched over to bronze. These are all called weeds, by the way. This is an invite for my next show. And so finally I got to show that self-portrait in the front, and there's another self-portrait in the back. It's called Total Torpor, Mad Malaise. And there are some faxes on the walls here. So this is a kind of Thematically, this has something to do with the Sleepwalker outside too that I'd like to address, and it's this idea of a kind of anxious male anxiety, let's say, a kind of masculinity in crisis sort of thing. And so this is a sculpture I thought was a little bit addressed that somehow. And I'm trying to keep this relevant to the debate that's going on around that piece outside. But I think that there's an anxiety and a tension in some of this work that really exhibits a kind of I don't know, anxious masculinity possibly, especially with the figure outside who a lot of people for some reason have been describing as schlumpy, which I think is unfortunate, but this is the invite for the show, which is really good. I'd read it to you if I could see it from here. I can't actually. Okay, I'm going to read this to you. This is the invite for that show, and it goes like this. I hope all is well. It's a letter to my dealer at the time. I hope all is well and that things are proceeding as planned. Things are extremely complicated. Nothing is getting done according to plan. I'm running out of money and rent and other bills are now past due. I'm extremely frustrated and simply I want to cancel all my future plans. This is not the image I want to project to you, but I feel like everything is coming undone. Please excuse my apologies for my complete lack of professionalism. I know we had huge expectations for that show, but frankly, we're going to have to save that shit for the next show. Next year, maybe. To be honest, I've been sorely disappointed in the help you have given me. You could, however, make it up by sending me a few $1,000s to get my feet. America is killing me. I really think in the next year I'm going to disappear in the fucking hills. Where there are no rich people. This is the real problem, my proximity to rich people. It fills me with greed and self-doubt. This is a terrible combination, total hunger and no real belief in my ability to obtain food. Really, this is it. I'm starving and feeding upon my own flesh. I'm eating myself alive. Or you're eating me alive, something. All this shit makes it really hard to think. The pressure is killing me. And the phone calls don't help, by the way. I became an artist to be free, and now you guys are running my fucking life. Anyway, this is really tough for me. My emotional state is really sad, and I feel terrible. This is real European emotion. I'm not. So here are our options. You go through I list out the options for the show. Sorry for the drama. Let's talk as soon as possible so we can work these things out. I know I've waited to the last minute. It's hard for me to deal with my problems. Call me first thing in the morning. So that was the show. That was the invite to the show that had these kind of. This is hard to talk about. Let's skip it. This is another poster that was made from a sketch for the show. This is the German version of this sculpture called Total Total Man Rays. There's a Swedish version and a German one. The German one was browner. And that's a self-portrait in a sense. I cast my own body and my own face is in there. And here is. This is kind of the primate version of Lost and Sick. I kind of like to do a human version of something and a primate version of it as well. Another version of that show that I did with Lisa. That's a sculpture called Fucked. I was sitting at home, and my girlfriend at the time said, "How was your day?" And I drew this image. Because I was planning for a show, I had no idea. So I looked at that thing and I was like, "Oh, well, there's the idea. That's how you do it." And in this show, this is really close to the entrance. So when you walk into the museum, you see him right away. And then way off in the distance, you see his arm laying on. So this gives a kind of forward motion to the figure that is really deliberate and hopeful. He's gonna make it. That's a different version of the machete. And then this is a drawing for a piece called Fucked Couple. I think it's useful sometimes when you're representing something that you want to have an impact, representing something forcefully, it often helps to represent its exact opposite. So for me, I was trying to make a work that spoke, in a sense, to a kind of romantic love and a kind of perseverance. So a good way for me in my head at the time was to represent its opposite force, which was a kind of hyper-violence. Almost kind of Looney Tunes, Warner Brothers style violence. So that's how this piece came about. And that's a tattoo on his arm that says "True Love Forever." And those interior arms, the arms that are holding hands, there's no trauma to those arms. They're completely intact. There's no objects in it and nothing like this. So they represent a kind of purity of heart. Poster for my next show that has a sculpture in the back called "Old Enemy, New Victim," and on the left side it's called "Fuck It, Free Yourself." On the right side it's called "On the Ropes," and in the front it's called "The Fucking Mess." That's a bad picture. I don't know if I have good pictures of this. Anyway, yeah, there we go. So it's a sculpture of $100 bills on fire. And so this is rendered in porcelain, and the flame is real, so this is a kind of eternal flame that is continually burning. We wanted to bring it here, but for certain reasons we couldn't show it here. So I wanted to have this kind of eternal flame to waste, or eternal flame to a kind of frivolity, let's say. That's painted bronze. It's called "The Fucking Mess." And this has some relation to some of the works upstairs. That's the big version. Some details. That's called "On the Ropes," and that's a sculpture. That's a prayer plant. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's a certain type of plant that does a very unusual motion at night. So it kind of mimics a kind of human prayer emotion. So I thought that would be the best plant to depict virtually dead. This is called "Old Enemy, New Victim." And this is rendered in a similar way to Josh upstairs on the top floor. It's made of the same material and same techniques to make this sort of thing. Yeah?
What was your inspiration behind this piece?
This piece particularly was, I was thinking a lot about money at the time when I was making this show, and being frustrated by needing to acquire it, and frustrated by not having it. So I wanted to make something that you could relate to on both sides of the coin in a way. Like some people relate to the emaciated, violent, attacking, and now successful figures in this piece, and some people relate to the super fat, gorged figure in ways. And I think it's a nice work because you relate to it in different moments of your life. You relate to each different character, maybe. So when I made this piece, I was relating to the attacking chimps, and now in my life, I sometimes relate to the fat, grotesque chimp in a lot of ways. And it's psychological largely, but it just depends on your stage in life, in a sense, relating to this work. I was being evicted from my apartment at the time, and so I was thinking a lot about, I don't like to share too much of that stuff, but I was thinking a lot about my landlord. I think this is called "The Old Me," and this is the poster for that show. And this is an 8x10 photograph I had taken by a professional portrait photographer in New York. And so here, these are all self-portraits in this particular show. So this is called Veg Head. And so on the left, it's a portrait of me sculpted out of vegetables, what looks like vegetables. And on the right is its rotted version. So and in the rot, there is some rebirth going on. So the rotting tubers are starting to sprout, and all of that. So I see this as a kind of very Christian narrative here, a very romantic narrative, as a story of a kind of rebirth and a kind of shedding of vanity, in a sense. So this is the first piece in that show, Veg Head. That's a different version of Veg Head. And here is the old me, a detail of the old me using the same technology as the Fuck It Free Yourself. This is just a set of headshots on fire. Also made in porcelain, so it doesn't, the paper is not the fuel, obviously, so it stays there lit for a long time. Veg man, double veg man, so same thing, rotted, or fresh one, rotted one. And this is Meathead, same deal. Go through this quickly. This is a show that has a lot of different course in it. Go through it quickly. There's the double Meathead, so fresh portrait of myself on the left. And on the right, these are all painted bronze and various materials like that. And in the back, you can see the female sleepwalker there. Always wanted to make a female version of this sculpture and just never got around to it. Now, finally, I did. And in the front now are the bronze weeds. So the weeds are now being made in bronze, a different material, and kind of a little bit easier to work with. This is called Yesterday, these pieces. And these are all painted bronze as well. This is called 99 cents. These are coins that float in the water. So I was thinking a lot about like a wishing well. You put a coin in the well and it falls to the bottom, and you have a wish. When it hits the bottom, that's the wish kind of happening. And so these coins always stay on the surface. They never consummate that desire. Called Glass of Water. That's Josh, who is upstairs. You'll see him in a second. And I started making these mirrors to go, when I conceived of Josh, I was thinking a lot about lightness and a lot about shedding obligations, shedding burdens, shedding beliefs, and shedding material in general. And also shedding subjectivity and personality and all of that. Wanting to be someone else, maybe. Wanting to be empty. And I thought these mirrors went really well with the idea of Josh also, because the mirrors are, a clear mirror is all about a pure image of the subject, which is you, a pure fidelity. And my mirrors are covered in layers of dust that appears that people have dragged their fingers through and written profanities in and dragged their names in and drawn pictures. So in my mirrors, you're seeing yourself through the history of all these other people and also through just the history of time and dust and decay. And so he and the mirrors and Josh have a nice kind of resonance together. This one's in the show upstairs. It's called Hand. These are called The Idiot. These are painted stainless steel. And they're heads made out of beer boxes. You know, and here's a sculpture called Arrangement. And you'll see this upstairs. And you'll see something a lot like it. And again, this is a simple inversion. I think goes really well with the lightness of Josh. These are various rope sculptures. You also see a few of those. And here's a sculpture called Window. And you'll see a whole room of these downstairs. I wanted to say quickly that downstairs has a different feel than upstairs. Downstairs to me is all about a kind of frustrated object. The mirrors downstairs are frustrated because you can't see clearly in them. The windows are frustrated objects because you certainly can't see through them. And then there are wall rubbings in the little side hallway, which are essentially extensions of the windows. So the windows become walls, the walls become decoration, the mirrors become traces of other people's subjectivity and not your own. So downstairs is a kind of heavy mood. The works are heavy. They are monoliths in a sense. And then there are images of walls, which are confines, just like these windows become. And then upstairs is light. The ropes are floating, the figure is floating, the flowers are floating inversely, and it's also the top floor, a beautiful sunlit place in the day. And then through that window on the top floor, you'll get to look down and see Sleepwalker through that very top window. And so that brings him back into that exhibition upstairs, and then all of that is, I think, quite complete. So there are kind of two bodies of work in this show, these and then the mirrors and Josh and the ropes. But I think really work well together, incorporating the architecture of this weird building. This one's here, they're all here, all the windows I ever made are here. So now you can ask me a bunch of questions. I'm done talking about that stuff. If there are questions, I don't know. Red hat.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'd like to know a little bit more about the location choice for the Sleepwalker. Did you choose the location for the piece? If so, why? And if not, how do you feel about the current location?
I did choose a location. It was a collaboration between me and Davis. And we wanted, I thought it was necessary for it to be seen from inside the exhibition. You know, so there are only a couple options. There aren't any windows in here. And on my space, there's one window upstairs. There are kind of some side windows that didn't really pose any viable options. Plus, there are some regulations we had to deal with. You know, we couldn't put it in the middle of the field because people play sports there. Couldn't put it too far out because no one would see it at night. So that we were limited by some logistical concerns. But my main importance was to be visible through that top window, because what happens in that moment is you have a mirror here, sculpture, mirror painting, and the inverted flowers, which is called arrangement. So that's in that room. And then you approach the window and you see this figure cinematically from the distance, 5 floors up, stranded in the middle of this vista, this snowy landscape. And I think that it amplifies the empathy one would feel to that figure. He's lost. He's profoundly lost in that landscape at that point, because you're 5 floors up and you're warm. And you're seeing him so cold and so desolate and so displaced, and in from my perspective, vulnerable and fragile in that big landscape. So I really like the cinematic experience of seeing him from up there. And really just the basic fact that you can experience him through the window of the museum. And not to seem too nerdy about it, but downstairs there are opaque windows, and then I think it's great that the final thing you see in the museum is looking through a window at this final sculpture that is utterly out of place. So that was the thinking on that.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
How do you feel now with the current student reaction to the location?
I feel fine about it. Let's go down here.
I think your relationship with reality is superbly expressed. Do you feel anytime in your career any pressure to conform? Because obviously some of your pieces seem a little bit controversial to some people.
No, conforming. Our world's not really that kind of place, it doesn't seem. I felt pressure to make things that were less expensive to make, maybe, No, I've been good at resisting that, and I don't think anyone feels that kind of pressure, really. It just doesn't. I don't think it really works that way. And really, I am not a provocateur. I think that they're in the larger landscape of the art world, so I never really think too much about that. I don't think too much about that. Back there.
So first, I want to note the irony of you coming into our home during this controversy and talking about a crisis of masculinity. When in our home you have put a representation that causes many of us extreme pain and discomfort, has made many members of our community feel very, very unsafe. When we expressed our anger, you and those representing you justified this statue on the basis of art that provokes discourse. But you don't need to patronize us by telling us what art does. I can't speak for anyone but myself, but as an artist, I can say that what I know about art is that art is power. Discomforting art is vitally important when it challenges dominant understandings of the world. But the discourse that your statue has created is a result of it playing directly into the structures of oppression that many members of our community experience on a daily basis. It is not dialogue. It is not dialogue that the statue has created. It is pain at seeing the conditions of our lives replicated. This is lazy art, and it, alongside the administration's response, betrays a profound lack of empathy, and I ask that it be removed as soon as possible.
That wasn't a question.
Other questions? Up there.
What's your response to just the media's response to the Sleepwalker?
I think it has been strange. I think it's been perplexing in many regards. I think the small student reaction, or some student reactions to this, have been surprising, and I think then, as a consequence, the media attention has been just completely surprising, and has gotten to a point that I don't think anyone could have predicted, and I think in some ways it's good and in a lot of ways it's bad, because I think largely it's missing the point. I don't know, it's very easy for things to get out of hand and super silly. I haven't read a lot of the stuff because I just don't care too much about that. I haven't read, particularly what I mean is I don't care about the comments and all the weirdo kind of lower level internet stuff that goes on in comment sections. So I haven't read any of that stuff. But you know, the narrative has gotten weird, and I think it's been profoundly surprising.
Thank you.
Whoa, all the way at the top.
Hi.
Hi.
So I know that over the past couple days there's been a lot of dialogue about what's happening on campus, but I was wondering how you envisioned students and other people that come to our campus to see the Sleepwalker interacting with it. Because as someone who's, posed and taken some pretty comical selfies with it, I was wondering, is that what you were expecting? And is that what you wanted from the piece?
Well, when you put something out, it's difficult to predict what's going to happen, and maybe to the earlier comment, I'm not in control of anyone's subjectivity, I can't predict that. It can't be expected that I would predict such a thing. In some ways, it shouldn't be expected that I would predict any of these reactions. But of course, I thought people would be taking selfies with it. I've seen hundreds of them. And I assumed people would think about it similarly in the way that I think about it, and also deal with it playfully, which they have been. I thought that it would get a lot of attention. I thought it would get a lot of attention, but I was surprised by the type of attention it got. But I think all of the playful stuff has been really cool. I think all of the other reaction to this work has been interesting. And I just have to say, I haven't talked this much about a work of art in a really long time. The way Lisa was kind of articulating this earlier. So I think that's good. And in many ways, this isn't an art conversation anymore. It's a conversation that I'm not proficient in, but I'm happy to take part in. So there you go. I saw a snowman built next to it or something like this. I saw someone twerking on it. So I think that there's going to be a lot of affection towards this thing. Right here in the middle.
Just from an artistic point of view, I was wondering why maybe, the choice of having an older as well as a younger 20-something-year-old and also a female. I just wanted to know, what the thinking behind having that particular sleepwalker.
Well, primarily because I had already done a young man, and I thought it would be interesting as I age to do a man who is aged from that previous sculpture, and I like the way an older man's body looks. Physically, it's more interesting looking in a lot of ways. And also, there's a technical issue which is boring, but I'll tell you. It's about hair. It's difficult to sculpt hair, and it's very difficult to sculpt realistic-looking hair. So that's why it couldn't be a woman, and that's also why it needed to be an older man, because he needed to be bald. But I mean, that's just a technical thing, and it's neither here nor there. Even if I was able to sculpt a woman's hair, it wouldn't be a woman. But that's the reason. Yeah.
Did you grow up surrounded by art, or
No.
was there something
No.
that influenced you maybe to become an artist?
Just books, looking at books. So many books, just leafing through books and knowing immediately I wanted to do that. Just escaping into it since when I was 15, just only doing that. Not hanging out with friends, in my garage painting all the time. Poring over everything I could get my hands on. This is pre-internet, so you don't have that many distractions in a sense. So you can just sit there with a book and be completely consumed in it. Picture books, not other books. Yeah. I mean, totally not surrounded by art, not from an art family, not from an educated family in any way. But knew right away that this is something I wanted to do. Fluorescent.
I was just wondering, this doesn't have anything to do with the Sleepwalker, but you passed over an earlier exhibit called Fuck the Rich, and I was wondering why you called it Fuck the Rich, and what was the thought behind it?
Oh yeah, those are sculptures of houseplants. So I had a lot of class anxiety, let's say, as growing up, and the more I knew, the more I got anxious about that kind of stuff, and the more I had some resentment in me, about that. And now that I was entering the art world, where you're surrounded by that, it was a source of some tension for me. So I wanted to, but I also knew that was fake tension. I also knew that this is a motivation in me, this is something in me that isn't viable in any way. But I still believed in that sentiment somehow, So I wanted to somehow make an object that was once wild, but has now been domesticated, Sort of like that sentiment of fuck the rich, that it was maybe sometime during a revolution, like the French Revolution meant something. But to me now, it doesn't really mean that much. I just think about it in my head sometimes. So I wanted to create an equivalent object somehow. You know what I mean? It was a little harebrained, and a little convoluted now that I look at it. But that's what that work was trying to do. It was trying to just speak to the cultivation of something wild, something primal. Harry.
I think one of the student comments in the paper about the sleepwalker had something to do with the reason that the sculpture was frightening to her was that it was so realistic. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could talk about the realistic aspect of your work. Almost everything that you showed us looks so similar to something else that you could almost mistake it for being that thing, with one exception, and that seemed to me to be the Boy Scouts, mm-hmm. where it's very clear that those aren't static people. They look, there's a more caricatured quality to them. So mm-hmm. What drives you in some cases to go all the way toward, I imagine, making something look as realistic as possible? Yeah, well, like I was saying earlier, it's that friction, that tension between understanding it as the thing and then understanding it as artwork, rather than understanding it as artwork first. A painting can almost never do that, because a painting is always there. You always understand it as a painting. Well, it's a painting of, even no matter how hyper-real it is, you always understand it as an art object, because it's always in its place. What to me is so exciting about those other things that, like say a weed growing out from the corner, is that, first of all, it doesn't belong there. Second of all, it looks almost exactly like the real thing. So I was interested in that experience of that pure communication between the idea of that thing directly coming to the viewer without any art interference, And that can last a couple seconds. It can last a week, like this has. It can last a millisecond, for an educated art viewer. But still, there's that moment where you're a little taken aback, and it's at that moment that communication, I think, can happen really fast, and you can have a fresh interaction with something, even brief. And I think that's important, and that's a crux of a lot of this work. Not a lot of the work that you'll see tonight, but a lot of that past work. That's kind of the spirit. Why not the Boy Scouts? Why does that? Because that was very early. I was interested in a kind of mediated representation of those figures. I was thinking a lot about how we understand ideas, and largely we understand ideas through images. So I wanted it to just have a kind of Disney feel to it, And also, I was young; I wasn't that good at what I was doing, so it was like within my means, Let's go all the way back. I don't know, someone back there. Okay, I'll come up here too. I'm sorry for not seeing you.
You chose just a chimpanzee around the 90s. Why not a gorilla or something else?
Yeah, because it was because the chimp has the closest DNA to human, right? And a chimp is always used in advertisements as a replacement for humans. And Noam Chomsky tried to teach sign language to chimps. And the Russians said chimp in space is always the stand-in for humanity. So to me, it was almost a ready-made choice. For me, it was simple. I didn't even think of it. Up here, someone had something? You. Okay, let's hear it. Yeah.
I was wondering if you had done multiple versions of a similar piece because of because of like how you felt at the time you were making it, or if it was different because of like the different place where you were showing it? Because of, like, the different
Okay, it's a good question. I do it differently slightly because I just get so bored doing it exactly the same way, and sometimes it's hard to do it exactly the same way. So for me, it was a great opportunity to do two versions of that thing. We're popping it out of the same mold, essentially, you know. So it was just the paint job that varied, and to me, it was just to keep myself engaged in the work. And I'm assuming the next Sleepwalker I do, you know, this will be an edition of 3 also. I'm guessing maybe he'll wear gray underpants or something like that, just to have some variation. And I know that's not very interesting for me. You know, not a huge thing, but it's something, you know, when you're making it. And you had a second one? Let's hear it. That's a long conversation. That's maybe for a different time. It's a lot of work though. Up there.
As the scale and scope of your projects increase, I would imagine the labor increases. And can you just speak of how you operate with labor or assistance with the project?
Yeah, I have a staff, and I have a studio manager and some specialists who do really special work for me, who come in and out. But you're right, the scale of some of these things, and to get the amount of work done that we need to, there just obviously have to be people around. And clearly I don't pour bronze at my studio, so there's, you know, naturally a foundry that does that stuff, and, you know, the guy with the laser cutter does that stuff. So we farm out some of the work, but most of the stuff you see here was all put together in my studio, was all fabricated in my studio, under my supervision, obviously, my studio manager's supervision, you know, under the 5 people who work there. Which is a weird way to work, you know, but it's become supernatural, super normal to me. Yeah.
So I heard that the campus police has been paying extra attention on the sleepwalker outside, and they, so like I heard that if you dress the man or like you get fined, and any small man built beside it will be destroyed. Was it your intention to protect that sculpture from the interacting with students, or what's your opinion on this?
Well, I don't know anything about it, but I think that property should be protected. But I don't care about a snowman.
Hey, honey, I think
Yep.
we should take one more question.
Yeah.
And then everybody should go downstairs and have reception prepared. Everyone can talk to Tony. You can go upstairs and see the exhibition on the 5th floor, go down to the lower level.
Yeah.
So, you know, get the copy.
Let's do it. Your hands up.